They say you can't buy trust, but I'll tell you what you can buy. Time. Time to watch. Time to test. Time to know for certain whether the man who wants to marry your daughter is the real deal or just another polished fake. My name is Marcus Chen, and for 18 months, my son-in-law has been running operations at my company without knowing I'm the one who put him there. Tonight, at a restaurant overlooking the Columbia River, his father is about to try and destroy everything I built. What he doesn't know is that I've been preparing for this moment since the day we lost in court 15 years ago. And what neither of them knows. Derek figured out the truth 6 months ago and never said a word. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I'm 62 years old. I own Chen Maritime Logistics, a shipping and freight distribution company that moves cargo up and down the West Coast and into Asia. We're not Amazon. We're not FedEx. But if you've bought anything made in Taiwan, Vietnam, or South Korea in the last 20 years, and it arrived in Oregon, Washington, or Northern California, there's a decent chance we handled some part of that journey. We employ about 1,200 people. Last year, we cleared $73 million. I drive a 15-year-old Honda Accord with a dent in the rear bumper from a Costco parking lot. People who know what I'm worth think I'm eccentric. People who don't know think I'm a middle manager at my own company. I prefer the second group. Portland, Oregon, is my home. Has been for 40 years. My parents came here from Taiwan in 1976 with 2 suitcases and a cousin's address. My father worked at a fish processing plant on the docks. My mother cleaned houses in the West Hills. I was 8 when we arrived. I learned English, watching Sesame Street and playing basketball at the community center. By 16, I was translating shipping manifests for dock supervisors. By 25, I had my own freight brokerage. By 35, I owned the docks where my father used to work. I built Chen Maritime because I understood something most people don't. The world runs on things moving from one place to another, and the people who control that movement control everything. I'm not flashy. I don't own a yacht. What I own is a network of relationships, contracts, and leverage that makes me indispensable. That's better than a yacht. A yacht you can sink. My daughter Sarah is 28. She's an architect, designing affordable housing projects downtown. She got her degree from University of Oregon, then came back because, in her words, this is where the work that matters is. She looks like her mother, who passed away 6 years ago. Same sharp eyes. Same way of listening, where you know she's cataloging everything you say and 3 things you didn't. 3 years ago, Sarah went to an architecture expo at the convention center. She came home talking about a man she'd met, Derek Morrison. He worked in logistics. He was funny. He asked good questions. A month later, she brought him to Sunday dinner. I liked him immediately, which made me suspicious. Derek was 31. Tall, solid build, brown hair thinning at the crown. He wore a button-down with the sleeves rolled up and laughed at my jokes. He asked about Chen Maritime like he actually cared, not like he was networking. He helped Sarah clear the table without being asked. When he left, he shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Thank you for having me, sir. Your daughter talks about you a lot." The next morning, I called a private investigator I've used for employee background checks. I didn't tell Sarah. I'm not apologizing for it. The report came back a week later. Derek Allen Morrison, born in Seattle, raised in Olympia. Degree in supply chain management from Washington State University. 8 years at a freight company in Tacoma. Solid reviews. No criminal record. No debt beyond a student loan he was paying down ahead of schedule. Parents still married, living in Olympia. Father's name, Richard Morrison. I sat at my desk and read that name 3 times. Richard Morrison. The name hit me like cold water. 15 years ago, Richard Morrison was a corporate attorney representing a competitor, PacWest Freight. They'd accused us of underbidding contracts using insider information. It wasn't true. We were just better. Richard Morrison didn't care about truth. He cared about winning. He filed a lawsuit that took 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight. We won. PacWest Freight. Folded. 6 months later. Richard Morrison's firm dropped him shortly after. Word got around that he'd pushed the case too hard. Burned bridges with clients who wanted to settle. I hadn't thought about Richard Morrison in a decade. And now his son was dating my daughter. I sat in my office overlooking the Willamette River and asked myself a question that's defined every major decision I've ever made. What do I actually know, and what do I need to find out? What I knew, Derek seemed like a good man. Sarah was happy. I had no evidence Derek knew who I was, or that his father and I had history. What I needed to find out, whether Derek was genuinely good, or whether this was something else. I had a choice. I could tell Sarah and let her decide. Or I could test the son and see what he was made of. I chose to test him. 2 weeks later, Derek received a call from an executive search firm. They were looking for a chief operating officer for a mid-sized logistics company in Portland. Competitive salary. Growth potential. Would he be interested? Derek said yes. He didn't know the search firm was contracted by me. He didn't know the interview panel worked for me. He didn't know that the job offer, the corner office on the 4th floor, and the $75,000 salary with bonuses all came from the man whose daughter he'd been dating for 6 months. Sarah knew. I told her the night before Derek's first interview. She sat across from me in my kitchen, holding a mug of tea. "Dad," she said quietly, "this is insane." "I prefer to think of it as strategic family planning," I said. "You're testing him. I'm giving him an opportunity. If he's as good as he seems, he'll earn it on merit. If he's not, I'll find out." She shook her head. "And when are you planning to tell him?" "When I know," I said. She didn't argue. Sarah understands how I think. She doesn't always agree, but she understands. Derek accepted the position 3 weeks later. His first day was a Tuesday in September, crisp and clear. I watched him walk into the building from my office window. He wore a navy suit and carried a leather messenger bag. He looked nervous. He looked eager. He looked like a man who believed he'd earned something. For the next 18 months, I watched Derek Morrison the way a ship captain watches the horizon, carefully, constantly, waiting for the storm I wasn't sure was coming. Derek Morrison's first month at Chen Maritime, he did exactly what I expected. He showed up early. He stayed late. He asked smart questions and took notes in a leather notebook that was already half filled with his own observations before he even started. He listened more than he talked, which in my experience is the mark of either a wise man or a careful one. I was trying to figure out which. I didn't hover. That would have been obvious. But I have people who report to me, and those people have people who report to them. And information flows upward in an organization the way heat rises. By the end of Derek's first quarter, I knew he'd identified inefficiencies in our Southern Oregon routes that veteran managers had been ignoring for 3 years. He'd reorganized the dispatch schedule to reduce empty return hauls. Small changes, smart changes, the kind that don't make headlines but save money. By month 6, he'd proposed something bigger. We had a meeting. Derek, myself, our CFO, and 2 regional managers. Derek stood at the head of the conference room with a laptop and a presentation he'd clearly spent weeks on. He walked us through a restructuring of our entire West Coast logistics network. Consolidate 3 distribution hubs into 2. Reroute shipments through a centralized sorting facility in Sacramento. Upgrade our tracking software to real-time GPS integration. The upfront cost was $450,000. The projected annual savings was $2.1 million. I let the regional managers ask their questions first. They poked holes. They challenged assumptions. Derek didn't get defensive. He adjusted. He showed alternate scenarios. When they ran out of objections, I asked him one question. "What happens if you're wrong?" He looked at me. Didn't blink. "Then I own it. And we adjust." But I'm not wrong. I approved the proposal that afternoon. 14 months in, the new system had saved us $1.8 million. Derek sent me a 2-page report acknowledging the shortfall and explaining the 3 variables he'd underestimated. Then he sent me a revised model, projecting we'd hit $2.3 million by year 2. He was right. But the moment I truly started to believe Derek Morrison was who he appeared to be, didn't come from a spreadsheet. It came from a dinner in Southeast Portland at a hot pot restaurant where I wasn't supposed to be. One of our largest shipping partners is a manufacturing conglomerate based in Shenzhen. Their North American director, a man named Wei Chen, no relation, had been trying for 2 years to negotiate a side deal that would give his company priority loading at our terminals in exchange for what he called a consulting fee. What he actually meant was a bribe. I turned him down twice. Politely. Firmly. Apparently, Wei Chen decided to try his luck with my new COO. I heard about the dinner from my CFO, who heard about it from her assistant, who happened to be eating 2 tables over. Wei Chen had invited Derek to discuss partnership opportunities. Derek went. I didn't interfere. I wanted to see what he'd do. According to my source, Wei Chen spent 45 minutes talking about growth opportunities and strategic alignment, and all the corporate language people use when they're trying to dress up something ugly. Then, over dessert, he slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $25,000, made out to Derek personally. A retainer, Wei called it, for advisory services. Derek picked up the envelope, looked at it, set it down. "Mr. Chen," Derek said. And I heard this part directly from Derek himself 2 days later when he walked into my office and told me the whole story unprompted. "I appreciate the offer, but if you want priority loading at our terminals, you'll need to submit a formal proposal through our standard procurement process. I'm happy to walk you through it, but I can't accept this." Wei Chen tried to insist. Derek stood up, left the envelope on the table, and walked out. The next morning, Derek sent me an email with the subject line, "Attempted bribery incident." He attached a detailed account of the dinner, including timestamps, direct quotes, and a recommendation that we review our contractual relationship with Wei Chen's company. Professional. Transparent. By the book. I called him into my office that afternoon. "You could have just taken the money," I said. He looked genuinely confused. "No, I couldn't." "Why not?" "Because it's not mine to take," he said. "This company has a reputation. That's worth more than $25,000. And if I compromise that, I'd be compromising you." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I nodded. "Thank you for telling me." "Of course," he said. And then he went back to work. That night I sat in my office after everyone had gone home and looked out at the city lights reflecting off the Willamette River. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the young man she'd brought home 3 years ago who'd asked good questions and cleared the table without being asked. I thought about the employee I'd tested for 18 months, who'd done nothing but prove himself over and over. I thought maybe, just maybe, bloodlines didn't matter as much as I'd feared. And then my phone rang. The caller ID said Derek Morrison. I answered. "Marcus," he said. He sounded careful. "I have a favor to ask." "Go ahead." "My parents are in town this weekend. They'd like to meet you. Properly. Have dinner. The 4 of us. Well, 5. With Sarah." Something in my chest tightened. "Your parents?" "Yeah. My dad's been asking about you for a while. I think he's curious. You know how parents are." I did know. I knew exactly how parents are. Especially parents like Richard Morrison. "Where?" I asked. "There's a place my dad likes. Jake's Famous Crawfish, down on the waterfront. Saturday night. 7 o'clock. Does that work?" Every instinct I'd developed over 40 years in business was screaming at me. This wasn't a dinner invitation. This was something else. But I didn't know what. "Not yet." "Sure," I said. "I'll be there." "Great," Derek said. He sounded relieved. "Thank you, Marcus. Really, it means a lot." We hung up. I sat there in the dark office, phone still in my hand. Richard Morrison wanted to meet me. After 15 years of silence. After his son had spent 18 months working at my company. After I'd spent 18 months watching that son prove himself again and again. Richard Morrison, who tried to destroy me in court and failed. Richard Morrison, who'd lost everything when the case fell apart. Richard Morrison wanted to have dinner. I opened my laptop and sent an email to my attorney. The subject line was simple. Need everything you have on Richard Morrison. Current status. Finances. Recent activity. By Friday. Then I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For 18 months, I'd been testing Derek Morrison. Watching him. Waiting to see if he was his father's son. Now I was about to find out if his father had been watching me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Derek had his own secrets. Let me tell you what happened 6 months before that phone call. 6 months before Richard Morrison asked his son to arrange a dinner. It was March. A Wednesday night. Derek was working late, which he did often. Not because anyone asked him to, because that's who he was. What happened that night, I only learned about later. Much later. So let me tell it the way Derek told it to me. In his words, Derek had been at Chen Maritime for 12 months. He'd been dating Sarah for almost 3.5 years, and they'd started talking seriously about marriage. The kind of close where you start looking at rings online. He loved the job. The logistics restructuring project had just been approved, and he was deep in implementation, working 60-hour weeks to prove the projections were right. That Wednesday night, he was alone in the office. Nearly 9 o'clock. He'd been reviewing old shipping contracts, looking for precedents for a routing dispute with a vendor in Oakland. The filing system was half digital, half paper, a mess Derek had been quietly organizing for months. He pulled a banker's box off a shelf. The label said Contracts 2007 to 2009. When he opened it, the first document wasn't a contract. It was a corporate filing. Articles of Incorporation for Chen Maritime Logistics, dated 2003. At the bottom, Marcus Chen, founder and principal owner. Derek stared at it. His first thought was confusion. Marcus Chen was Sarah's father. The man who'd welcomed him into his home, who'd made jokes about Portland traffic. But Derek had never connected that Marcus with Chen Maritime. Why would he? Marcus had never mentioned owning the company. Neither had Sarah. Derek put the document back, then took it out again. Read it 3 more times. Then he went to his computer and started searching. Corporate records are public if you know where to look. 20 minutes later, Derek had confirmed it. Chen Maritime Logistics. Sole proprietor. Marcus Chen. Established 2003. Everything matched. Derek sat back and tried to process what this meant. He'd been hired through an executive search firm. He'd interviewed with a panel. He'd negotiated his salary with the CFO. At no point had anyone mentioned Marcus Chen, which meant either this was an incredible coincidence or it wasn't a coincidence at all. Derek pulled out his phone. Almost called Sarah. His thumb hovered over her name. Then he stopped. If Marcus had hidden this deliberately, calling Sarah now would force a conversation Derek wasn't ready to have. And if Sarah didn't know, telling her would betray whatever test Marcus had in mind. Derek put the phone down. He sat in that office until midnight, thinking. The next morning, he showed up at 7:30, same as always. He went to the same meetings. And he didn't say a word. For a week, he watched. He noticed things he hadn't before. The way executives deferred to Marcus's opinions. The way Marcus's name appeared in strategic email chains. The way people talked about what Marcus would want. It was obvious once you knew. 2 weeks after finding the document, Derek made a decision. He wasn't going to say anything. Not to Sarah, not to Marcus, not to anyone. Because Derek understood. If Marcus had hidden his identity, it was because he was testing something. Testing Derek. Maybe testing whether Derek was capable, whether he was trustworthy, whether he had ulterior motives for dating his daughter. If Derek confronted Marcus now, demanded answers, he'd be proving he couldn't handle it, that he needed validation. But if he stayed quiet, if he kept working, if he proved himself on merit alone, knowing who was watching, that would be a different kind of answer. So Derek doubled down. He worked harder. He delivered results. He made sure every decision was something he could defend. And then, about 2 months into his silence, Derek started thinking about something else. His father, Richard Morrison, had been a corporate attorney, successful for a while, then not. There'd been a case that went badly. Richard didn't talk about it, but Derek had pieced together that his father's career had ended in his mid-50s, earlier than it should have, and that there was bitterness attached. Derek had never asked for details. But now, knowing Marcus Chen owned a shipping company, knowing Marcus had hired him under an assumed identity, Derek started wondering if there was more to his father's story. He started digging. Public court records, old news articles, legal filings, 3 weeks of late nights, and he found it. Morrison versus Chen Maritime Logistics. Filed 2008. Allegation, corporate espionage and unfair bidding practices. Derek's stomach dropped. He read the entire case. Every motion, every exhibit. And the more he read, the more he understood. His father had represented PacWest Freight. They'd accused Chen Maritime of stealing proprietary information. The case dragged on for 2 years. Then, near the end, something shifted. Chen Maritime's legal team produced evidence showing PacWest Freight had falsified documents. Not Marcus, PacWest, and Richard Morrison, as their attorney, had submitted those falsified documents as evidence. The case collapsed. PacWest folded. Richard Morrison's firm let him go. Derek sat in his apartment, staring at a scanned shipping manifest with his father's handwriting in the margins. His father had lied. Or at least, his father had pushed a case he should have known was built on lies. And Marcus Chen had won, because he'd been telling the truth. Derek closed the laptop, sat in the dark for a long time. When Sarah came home an hour later, she found him on the couch, staring at nothing. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Derek said. "Just tired." He didn't tell her. He didn't tell anyone. Because now Derek wasn't just proving himself to Marcus, he was proving something to himself. That he wasn't his father. That he could earn something on his own. That when the truth finally came out, Derek would be standing on solid ground. 6 months later, Richard Morrison called his son and asked him to arrange a dinner. And Derek said yes, because he knew exactly what was coming. Richard Morrison didn't flinch. If my line rattled him, he didn't show it. Instead, he placed both hands flat on the table, palms down, the gesture of a man anchoring himself before a storm. 15 years ago, Richard began, his voice measured, controlled. "You destroyed my career, Marcus. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway." I said nothing. I let him talk. "I represented PacWest Freight in a lawsuit against your company. A legitimate case. We had evidence that Chen Maritime was using insider information to systematically underbid our contracts. Evidence. Documentation. Testimony from employees who'd seen it happen." He paused, looked at me like he expected me to interrupt. I didn't. "But you didn't just defend yourself," Richard continued. "You went scorched earth. You buried us in motions. You dragged out discovery for 2 years. You bled us dry on legal fees until PacWest couldn't afford to keep fighting. And then, when we were finally ready to settle, you produced documents at the last possible moment that made us look like we'd falsified evidence." His voice was rising now. Not loud, but harder. Sharper. PacWest folded 6 months later. My firm dropped me. 30 years of practice, Marcus. 30 years of building a reputation. And you took it away because you couldn't stand to lose. Linda reached over and touched Richard's arm. He didn't acknowledge it. I lost clients. I lost colleagues. I lost the career I'd spent my entire adult life building. And for what? Because I had the audacity to challenge you? Sarah's face had gone pale. She was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time, and wasn't sure she recognized what she saw. Derek still hadn't moved. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle working beneath the skin. Richard leaned forward. "And now, 15 years later, I find out that my son, is working for you. That you hired him. That you've been positioning him grooming him, integrating him into your company. And I'm supposed to believe that's a coincidence? He tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. This is a lawsuit, Marcus. Fraud. Emotional manipulation. Intentional interference with family relationships. I'm prepared to file it Monday morning unless we reach an understanding tonight. What kind of understanding? I asked quietly. $5 million, Richard said. Paid to me as restitution for what you took 15 years ago. And Derek resigns from Chen Maritime. Immediately. Completely. No severance. No references. Clean break. Linda was nodding along, her face a mask of righteous support. Richard sat back. That's what it costs to make this go away, Marcus. That's what it costs to buy your way out of what you did to my family. The silence that followed was different from the one I'd created earlier. This one had weight, expectation. The whole table was waiting to see what I'd do. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were wet. She was trying not to cry, and failing. I looked at Derek. He was staring at his father with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger. Something else. Something colder. Then I reached into my jacket pocket. Not for the envelope Richard had given me. For my own. I pulled out a slim folder. Tan. Unremarkable. I opened it on the table in front of me. Richard, I said, let me tell you what your son has accomplished in the 18 months he's worked for me. Richard's eyes narrowed. In his first 6 months, Derek identified inefficiencies in our Southern Oregon routes that veteran managers had been ignoring for 3 years. He reorganized our dispatch schedules. Small changes, but they saved us $120,000 annually. I pulled out a document, slid it across the table. At month 6, Derek proposed a complete restructuring of our West Coast logistics network. Consolidate 3 distribution hubs into 2. Reroute shipments through a centralized facility in Sacramento. The upfront cost was $450,000. The projected savings was $2.1 million per year. Another document. Performance analysis. Charts. Numbers. I approved the proposal. By month 14, the new system had saved us $1.8 million. Derek sent me a report acknowledging the shortfall and explaining the variables he'd underestimated. Then he sent me a revised model projecting we'd hit $2.3 million by year 2. He was right. Sarah was wiping her eyes. She was listening now. Every performance review Derek received was conducted by external consultants. Blind reviews. They didn't know who he was or who he was connected to. Every single one came back exemplary. I looked at Richard. Your son didn't get his position because I wanted to control him. He got it because he earned it. On merit, on talent, on the ability to do the work better than anyone else we interviewed. You knew who he was, Richard said, his voice tight. I did, I said. I knew exactly who he was. And I gave him the job anyway. Because unlike you, Richard, I believe people are more than their father's mistakes. The words landed like a slap. Linda's mouth opened. Richard's face went red. Sarah turned to me. Her voice was barely a whisper. Dad, you knew? From the beginning? I looked at my daughter. Yes. You tested him. I gave him an opportunity, I said. If he was as good as he seemed, he'd prove it. If he wasn't, I'd find out. Either way, I'd know. Sarah shook her head, somewhere between disbelief and understanding. And then Derek stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. He just pushed his chair back and stood, his hands resting on the table, looking down at all of us. I need to say something, he said quietly. And nobody's going to like it. Every eye at that table turned to Derek Morrison, and the room went absolutely silent. Every eye at that table turned to Derek Morrison, and the room went absolutely silent. Derek looked at his father, then at me, then at Sarah. His hands were still resting on the table, steady, but I could see his chest rising and falling with careful breaths. A man about to jump and trying to remember he can swim. I've known Marcus owns this company since March, Derek said. The words hung in the air for a full 3 seconds before anyone reacted. Sarah's mouth opened. Linda's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Richard's eyes went wide, and I felt something in my chest I wasn't expecting. Surprise. Pure, complete surprise. What? Sarah said. Derek didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. I was working late. Found an old corporate filing in a storage box. Articles of incorporation. Your name was right there, Marcus. Founder and principal owner. It took me about 20 minutes to confirm it through public records. He finally looked at Sarah. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I should have. But I needed to figure out what it meant first. Sarah was shaking her head, not in denial, just overwhelmed. Derek turned back to me. I knew you'd hired me. I knew you'd arranged the whole thing. The search firm, the interview, the job. All of it. And I had to decide what to do with that information. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Because I realized something, Derek said. If you went to that much trouble to hide who you were, it was because you were testing me. Testing whether I was capable, whether I was trustworthy, whether I had some agenda for dating Sarah. He paused, and I figured if I confronted you, if I got angry or demanded explanations, I'd be proving I couldn't handle it, that I needed validation. But if I stayed quiet and just did the work, knowing the whole time who was watching, that would be a different answer. I sat very still, processing, recalibrating everything I thought I knew about the last 6 months. So I doubled down, Derek said. I worked harder. I made sure every decision I made was something I could defend. Every project, every report, every interaction. I proved myself because I wanted to, not because I thought you owed me anything. Sarah reached over and took Derek's hand. She was crying again, but differently now. Richard found his voice. You knew he was using you, and you just accepted it? He wasn't using me, Dad, Derek said, and for the first time his voice had an edge. He was testing me. There's a difference. There's no difference, Richard shot back. He manipulated you. He put you in a position where you had no choice but to perform. That's control, Derek. That's what he does. Derek turned to his father. His jaw set. And then I did something you never did, Dad, Derek said slowly. I looked at the evidence. Richard went very still. Derek reached into his own jacket, pulled out a folded stack of papers, set them on the table in front of his father. 2 months after I found out about Marcus, I started wondering why you never talked about what happened 15 years ago, why your career ended so suddenly, why there was so much bitterness, but no details. He unfolded the papers. So I pulled the court records. Morrison versus Chen Maritime Logistics, filed 2008. I read the whole case, every motion, every exhibit. Richard's face had lost all its color. You represented PacWest Freight, Derek continued. They accused Chen Maritime of corporate espionage. You spent 2 years pushing that case. And then, right before trial, Marcus's legal team produced shipping manifests that showed PacWest had falsified documents. Derek slid one of the papers across the table. A scanned image. A shipping manifest with handwritten notes in the margin. That's your handwriting, Dad. Your notes. On a document that was proven in court to be falsified, you submitted forged evidence. You tried to frame Marcus Chen for crimes he didn't commit. Linda made a sound. A small gasp. She put her hand over her mouth. The case collapsed, Derek said. PacWest folded. Your firm let you go. Not because Marcus destroyed you. Because you destroyed yourself. Richard was shaking. His hands, his shoulders, his voice when he finally spoke was barely audible. You don't understand what happened. You weren't there. I read the transcripts, Dad. I read the judge's ruling. I know exactly what happened. Richard stood up suddenly. His chair scraped backward. You're choosing him over me? Your own father? Derek stood too. Faced him across the table. I'm not choosing him, Dad. I'm choosing the truth. And I'm choosing to be better than this. His voice cracked on the last word. Not from weakness, from the weight of what he was saying. I love you, Derek said. But I can't let you do this. I can't let you blame someone else for decisions you made. And I can't be part of a lie. Linda stood. She was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. She looked at Derek, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then just reached out and touched his shoulder. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Derek. Then she turned to Richard. We need to go. Richard stared at his son for a long moment. His face was a war between anger and heartbreak. Then he picked up the manila envelope, the one he'd placed on the table with such confidence 20 minutes ago. He looked at me once, didn't say a word, just turned and walked toward the exit. Linda followed, glancing back at Derek one last time before disappearing into the main dining room. The four of us sat in silence. Sarah was still holding Derek's hand. Derek was staring at the table, his jaw working like he was trying to hold something in. The waiter appeared at the edge of our section. Young, nervous, clearly aware something significant had just happened, but not sure what. Is everything all right? He asked carefully. Can I interest anyone in dessert? Nobody laughed. But something about the timing, the sheer absurdity of the question broke the tension just enough. I looked at Derek. He looked at me. You knew for 6 months, I said quietly. And you never used it, never leveraged it, never even mentioned it. Why? Derek took a breath. Let it out slowly. Because that's not who I am, he said. And I needed to know if that's who you are, too. We ordered pie. All three of us. Mary and Barry. Because we were in Oregon and that's what you do. The waiter brought 3 slices and 3 forks and quietly disappeared, probably relieved that whatever storm had passed through our table seemed to be over. For a minute, nobody said anything. We just sat there, Derek and Sarah on one side, me on the other, processing what had just happened. Finally, I spoke. I owe you an apology, I said to Derek. What I did, testing you like that, hiding who I was. It wasn't fair. Derek shook his head. You did what you needed to do. I understand why. Do you? Yeah, he said. You'd been burned before. By someone you trusted. And then his son shows up dating your daughter. I'd have done the same thing. Sarah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You two are completely impossible. You know that, right? I looked at my daughter. She was smiling through tears, shaking her head. You're both insane, she continued. Dad, you secretly hire my boyfriend to test him for 1.5 years. Derek, you find out and just, decide to work harder? And neither of you thought to maybe just have a conversation like normal human beings? We're having one now, Derek said. After your parents just walked out of a restaurant, Sarah said. After 18 months of spy games. This is not normal. She was right, of course. But there was affection in her voice underneath the exasperation. I ate a bite of pie. It was good, tart and sweet at the same time. So what happens now? Derek asked. I set down my fork. That depends. Do you still want to work at Chen Maritime? Yes, Derek said immediately. If you'll have me. On one condition, I said. Derek waited. No more secrets, no more tests. We do this as partners. Real partners. You make decisions, you run operations, and I trust you to do it because you've already proven you can. Not because I'm watching over your shoulder. Derek nodded slowly. I can do that. Good, I said. Then I want to offer you 20% ownership in the company. Full equity stake. You'll have voting rights, profit sharing, the whole structure. You'll be a partner, not an employee. Derek stared at me. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. 20%, Derek repeated. You've earned it, I said. Not because you're my son-in-law. Because you're the best COO I've had in 22 years. And I want you invested in what we're building. Literally invested. Derek looked at Sarah. She nodded, tears in her eyes again. On one condition, Derek said. Name it. No more secrets, he said. From either of us. We're transparent from here on out. About the business, about decisions, about everything. I extended my hand across the table. Deal. Derek shook it. We finished our pie. We paid the check, which Richard had left unpaid in his exit. The waiter looked relieved when I handed him my card. Outside, the Portland night was cool and clear. The kind of September evening where you can smell the river and the city lights reflect off the water like scattered stars. "Walk with me," I said. We walked along the waterfront, the three of us, toward the Morrison Bridge. The Columbia River stretched out dark and wide, freighters in the distance blinking their running lights. "My parents came here with 2 suitcases," I said. "My father gutted fish on these docks. My mother cleaned houses for people who didn't know her name. They worked themselves to exhaustion so I could have what they didn't. And I built Chen Maritime because I wanted to make sure that kind of sacrifice mattered, that it meant something." I stopped walking, looked out at the water. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that trust isn't something you take. It's something you give. And you gave it to me, Derek. Even when I didn't deserve it. You gave it by staying, by doing the work, by being exactly who you said you were. Derek didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "I was terrified, you know, that I'd always just be the son-in-law, that people would look at me and only see Sarah's husband, that I'd never prove I earned my place." "You proved it," I said. 6 months ago. A year ago. Every day you showed up." Sarah linked her arm through Derek's, then reached out and took my hand. The three of us stood there on the waterfront, the city humming around us, the river moving past us in the dark. "I love you both," Sarah said, "and you're both idiots, but you're my idiots." 1 week later, we signed the partnership papers in my office. Derek's name went on the incorporation documents. 20% ownership, full voting rights. The lawyers made it official, but the handshake at Jake's famous crawfish had already made it real. Last month, my assistant told me Richard Morrison had called the office. I was in a meeting. She asked if I wanted her to take a message. I said no. Let it go to voicemail. But Derek was walking past her desk at that moment. He stopped. "Was that my dad?" She nodded. Derek picked up the phone, took the call right there in the hallway. I watched from my office doorway. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. When Derek hung up, he stood there for a moment, then turned and saw me watching. He smiled. Not a big smile. A small one. The kind that says something broke and maybe it's starting to heal. He didn't tell me what they talked about. I didn't ask. Some bridges rebuild themselves when you stop burning them. Derek Morrison runs 20% of my company now. He's good at it. Better than good. But that's not the part that matters. What matters is that when he goes home at night to my daughter, to the life they're building together, he knows exactly who he works for. Himself. And if you've made it this far in this story, if it meant something to you, do me a favor. Share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you haven't already. These stories only reach people when people like you decide they're worth passing along. So, thank you. Genuinely. For listening. For being here. For being part of this. Now go build something worth trusting.